Hi, this is Wave, and this video was supposed to come up last year for Halloween, but it never did. Better late than never, right? Anyways, I've done a Magister Vader for 30 days writing challenge, so if you haven't seen that video, watch that first. That way this video will make more sense. Basically what I do is I write like an author for 30 days. That way I can see as myself as a newbie writer, learn some tips and tricks, while at the same time find not a perfect mentor, but basically someone that I can look up to and understand of relatability, because I'm still on my writing style and craft journey of being a writer. I don't know fully about myself yet, so doing this will actually help me become a better writer, while at the same time figure out what works for me and what doesn't. I definitely learned a lot for Magister Vader video, and I did Rachel Hawkins as well, which that video will come up after this one sometime in the future. Don't ask me when. So without further ado, let's get right to his core writing. Stephen King splits his work into 3 sections, and they are the pre-work, the work, and the post-work. So kind of like if you're doing film, the pre-production, production, and then the post-production type of deal. So for his pre-work, he has a glass of water and takes his vitamin supplements. And also he sits and has paper that line up the same way on his desk. He doesn't like anything in disorder. He has everything to be the same exact way. So I thought that was pretty interesting. For his actual work, he works at 8 o'clock to 8:30 of writing. Music, sometimes on, sometimes not. The door has to be closed. That's one of his main things for his morning routine. And internet completely off, because if you have distractions, you'll never be able to finish your work. For his writing routine, he also writes 6 pages a day or 2,000 words. He only stops if it's some type of emergency, like a family issue, or say if he was bleeding or something like that. So other than that, he's really strict and disciplined. For his post-work, he writes from 11:30 a.m. to 1:30 p.m., finishing up any of his writing. Whatever is left over, he needs to finish it with the door open. And then around the same time or after, he has leisure time reading a book, napping, watching TV, but the main goal is to get his writing done for the day. For the additional advice and tips that he gives that I found on YouTube and some other articles, interviews that he's done in the past, he says read books that are advanced to you, which is kind of an interesting concept, because usually for me, I don't read, I think, anything too advanced. But at the same time, reading in advance is actually a good thing, because even though it brings you discomfort, you're actually learning. Because you're actually dipping your toes into it, and then even if you don't understand it, the more you apply yourself to it and get used to it, the better and easier it comes, and then you end up finding things more challenging. So basically it broadens your mind. Another thing is when he has the door open for the post-workout, is basically let it be as a rewrite and not like an actual writing of like a draft type of deal. Don't dress up your vocabulary. He's anti-adverb. That's something I found interesting too. For paragraphs, they're meant to be visually appealing, but also at the same time be a structure. So it has to be pleasing to the eye, because if it's not, most likely people aren't going to bother to read, even if it is a good book. Though he does break exceptions to his own rule. Write anything that is truth to you. That's one of the biggest things. Because for writing, yes, there is fictional lies to it and all that, because it is fiction if you are writing fiction novels, but there is truth to it. Otherwise, you wouldn't be writing something that holds dear to you. What you know makes you unique. Not everybody is going to think the same way as you, and not everybody grows up the same way as you are. So if you read his writing craft book, he goes into not much detail, but at the same time detail about his life. And even though he claims that it's like he had a great childhood and all that, but the stuff that he's mentioned is like, this is horrific for a child. Nothing abusive or anything like that. Though for his babysitter, it was abuse. So if you read the craft book, You know, if you haven't, borrow from the library. Furthermore, about what you know, you have a different perspective of views. And because of that, it makes audience feel appeal to it because they never thought or think the way like you do. You need a routine. That is actually true. I actually learned that about myself as well. Very disciplined is what he is, but he's not a best-selling author for nothing. Learn to write different mediums: screenplays, poems, short form writing, even stage plays. That way you get a variety and actually understand more of the craft. That way, even though they're not the same structure, it just opens your mind in. Another tip that he actually mentions is that finding craft books that are pretty short are actually a good thing, because that means there's no fillers and they're just straight to the point of what you're actually looking for. And I struggle finding craft books because I noticed that I was actually reading a craft book for what was it, plot, or no, setting description. It was so much filler and not to the point to what I was looking for. So that book dragged on for like 2 or 3 months I was going through. Even though it did have some grammar in it that I was looking for, it was just vague and not what I was looking for. So he suggests reading Elements and Style. That's the one he mentions in his writing craft book, and that book's been around for like, what, decades or something? Most craft books that are out generally have like about like 2 or 3% of actually valuable information. Craft books that I've read in the past usually have 2 or 3% of actual valuable information that are actually straight to the point and get to what I was looking for. Like for me, my struggle was grammar. I have a history of bad grammar, but also in school they didn't teach it that well to begin with. And because novel fiction is so different from expository essays from school, you can break the rules. So I'm trying to learn more and convey the story to the character's voice. Restrict yourself to one medium. If you're a new writer, then start writing 1,000 words a day. Now for the rules before I tell you all of my experience through the whole thing. Rule number 1, I follow the author's routine at least once. If you've seen the Magister of Art video, you know why. My goal is to at least try at least once, that way I can at least be true to writing the routine. But I also understand that every day is not gonna be the way I want it to or their plan, because life is crazy and my scheduling routine changes every single day, especially because I'm a college student and this is actually when I did the challenge, so it was very chaotic and all that. Complete some additional methods like the advice and any tips that he gives out, I'll try to do that as well. My third rule is opt anything out that is self-harmful both physically and mentally, and anything that I have to tweak because I don't have the resources or I have limitations. Like for Magister of Art video, I couldn't drive around because we were in lockdown. So here's my experience writing like Stephen King for 30 days. Okay, so for day 1, I knew when I was going to do this challenge, it was going to be around when school started. When I do these challenges, I do it the first day of the month, and also make sure it has like 30 days. That way it's just easy for me to keep everything in order and not lose track of time if I get sick or something like that. So because I knew that this was going to happen during school, but I also wanted to get back to writing again, I didn't anticipate my first exam, from what I noted, was to be the same day as the challenge. Yeah. I couldn't move the exam to another date because I had no control over the schedule from the professor. So that really sucked. What I did was take my exam first thing in the morning. Since I woke up at 5 at the time, I was gonna take it at 6 a.m. It didn't happen. I got woken up by a text at 4 in the morning, and then what happened was after that, I ended up sleeping to make up for the time, which left me grouchy, and on top of it, my internet acted up. So I could not take the exam at 6 like I wanted to. It was such a frustrating and stressful day, and it was quite a horror nightmare, which is so fitting for how that this author writes horror genre. And it gets worse too. So I didn't start writing until 9 in the morning. The exam wore me out, and I didn't close the door in time because my dog decided to jump in. And I know my dog. If I kick him out, he starts to cry. And when he starts crying, I can't work in peacefulness and all that. So I knew that this day I was not going to follow his routine like I wanted to. I did try to restrain myself from editing because I had a bad habit of editing my work while I was writing, and that was actually a biggest flaw to me because that actually stops me from progressing further into the story, and then I get nowhere. Like, what was it? The first 6 months of writing, I was stuck on the first 5 chapters because I was like way in my head and then trying to be perfect, not make sense, thinking that if I actually fixed it, it would save me time in the future. A little bit did, but for majority it did not. While I was doing this challenge, I was still working on the draft of my book. And that was like the second half of the year from 2022. It was also a while since I actually wrote, so I had major writer's block and it just felt lost. But I knew that this was gonna help me get me back on track because it's gonna force me to write again. And the more you write, the better you get at writing. On top of the disaster of that morning, my software Faden is meant for screenplays, but they do have a template for novel. It froze on me while I was writing. So I couldn't write much like I wanted to. I was upset about it, but then I thought that probably needed to be updated, which it did. So what I ended up doing is just cutting the post work short because I had obligations I needed to get done as well for the day. So it was thrown on last minute. I knew that the first day was just gonna be worse if I try to continue on. So I thought that the next day can be better. For day 2, I actually overslept. I just couldn't sleep for some reason. Throughout the night I was tossing and turning. I don't know what it was. Though I went to bed early, so it was kind of confusing why that happened. So I had 30 minutes before the pre-work and I was able to do it, but I had to stop like 5 minutes before because a big thunderstorm came and I was worried that I was gonna lose my work. Oh yeah, forgot to mention. The month I did this challenge was the month it was hurricane season, which I'm filming this right now and I'm actually in hurricane season. It's like this video is meant to be. So because of the thunderstorm, I thought it's like, wait, I can write on my iPad and continue from there. So that's what I did. But the problem was I didn't charge it beforehand. The writing was awful. I couldn't hear my characters like I wanted to. And then I had a sudden epiphany that I was like, wait, maybe it needs to be in third person, not first person. So then that's when I started to think up how to do it for the next day. I started the pre-work at 6 a.m. Used my iPad this time and got straight into work. Started writing in third person and I was enjoying it for a bit because it actually helped me soothe out the blocks I was having. But then ultimately later on in the next few days, it actually wasn't meant to be. So the epiphany that I cured it didn't do it, but at least it got me writing and I found some more ideas for the missing pieces that I need in between to get to the incident points for the chapters. And I noted that this was going to be a tough challenge. I did the pre-work at 6 a.m. again. Got roughly about 500 words, so that's better than nothing, but not the 2,000 mark like he has. I did switch to 1,000 words just to give myself a little bit of a leeway because I never actually counted my word count before, and I didn't have any software like Scrivener for the app at the time to know how much I actually wrote and all that. So basically I was working on using OneNote on the iPad and also Google Docs. Because I was struggling with chapter 1, I decided to go for a different chapter and go back to writing first person, and it just felt right again. That way it just kept me progressing instead of being stuck and then wasting time for the whole challenge working on 2 or 3 chapters. Day 5, I barely got 500 words in. Wrote the same idea for a scene, but instead of getting rid of the top paragraph for later, I highlighted to indicate to move later in a scene or chapter. So that was a good thing that I did. So that's going to be the theme I've noticed from recounting what I've written down. It was basically oversleeping a lot, not hitting the word count or 6 pages. Yeah, it was bad. I wrote less and less each day, but I was getting back into the flow, so that was a good thing I've noted. The voice was coming for the characters in my style of writing, which I was still trying to figure out, but at least it was coming back more intuitively. I started to close the door for the pre-work, because I actually didn't do it for those times because I kept forgetting, or Mr. Oliver would sneak up on me and then he wouldn't leave. I noted that I understood why Stephen King closed the door, because until I started doing it that day, I didn't realize like the ambient noise from my brother's fan. It's like this, it's a small little thing like this big, but it's like a turbo fan, so it's pretty loud. So when I closed the door, it cut down the noise in half or more, and then I felt like I was in a bubble in my room. And that bubble actually kind of centered me being focused on the story full and not hearing like little distractions. Of course, I would hear my dog pat his feet whenever he wanted to get a drink of water. It was so interesting that closing a door made a difference. Another thing what I enjoyed too is that having the door shut meant that my family could not bother me, but they did. But for the most part, I would just get a knock and then it kind of throw me out. But when the door was closed at times, they didn't bother me. But then again, they don't wake up early like I do. I was able to finish chapter 1. The sleeping schedule was crazy for me. I still don't understand why that happened. And I couldn't even hit the 1,000 words a day. Fast forward to day 22, because everything else before then was pretty much the same thing. I was writing stuff that was just calling to me and just went with it. However, I was still stuck on chapter 2. So basically moved back and forth between the two. And while doing this challenge, my brain does this thing where if I'm like in a writer's block or I'm writing a scene where I'm kind of stuck, it just kind of gives me, it's like, hey, write another book. And it just kept flooding me with ideas and all that. So what I do is I open my OneNote, throw all of it in, and then just hold off on it until I'm done with my current book and then work on the next book. It just kept going though, and not able to actually write my first novel. So I'm pretty sure with the other book that I was writing, with all the scenes and all that, I've hit the 2,000 mark or past that. It wasn't meant for this challenge. That was the big thing. And also another thing I was having difficulty with was getting my head out of screenwriting format to novel. That was something that I've noticed months before, during the break before I went to this challenge, because I started writing screenplay before I decided that I was actually gonna write a novel for 2022. It's interesting, but at the same time it definitely held me back because it left me more confused and I just couldn't get my head out of the screenplay for some reason. It was very, very strange, while at the same time I was actually learning more about novel formatting. So yeah, that was another big issue. I did write on my iPad in the afternoon for the post-work, so at least something got done. The last 2 days, the hurricane came in, so I'm like, okay, I can just get at least something done before we lose power. And then this happened. I couldn't write that day or day 30 because we lost power and I need to preserve as much power as I could for stuff in case for emergency if we need to evacuate. So I couldn't control that for this challenge. So let's go with what I liked about this challenge. considering all the disaster and horrors that occurred. Not worrying about grammar errors or the constant re-editing, that was kind of a reliever because that was actually holding me back in my writing, because I was trying to like get it right the first time, and I had the mindset of I can like write the first draft, then the second will be the revision, and the third is just editing and then just submitting right off the bat. Yeah, that doesn't work. But I was an overachiever thinking I can do that, and I couldn't. The main objective for the goal was to write the book and then publish it. I'm actually planning on self-publishing it because I don't feel like waiting to actually be traditionally published. I will do that at some point in one of my books, but until then I'm just gonna focus on self-publishing and then move on to the next book, because this book that I'm doing is actually a series and it's gonna be 3 books in total. So focusing on just progressing through the story, don't worry about the little minor details, and having the mindset of that it's still a rough draft in the end, but I can always fix it on this second round, which there'll be the revisions. Closing the door for like the first hour of writing was actually interesting because it kept me focused. I didn't realize like how much my dog would come in to bother me, but having the door closed, he'd be like trottle to his feet, but then he'd actually walk away and then go bug my mom or something like that. So that was actually pretty good. I enjoy my dog, but he's a attention hog, and I can't type with both hands if one hand is going to him, petting him, and then he nudges me with his cold nose on my lap, and then he just like lays his head on top of my leg and then just looks up so cute and all that, and it's adorable, but at the same time it's like I gotta focus on the story. One of the things that he said in an interview was that the good ideas will always stick with you, and that is true, because this novel, I had this idea since middle school, and the reason why I never wrote it at that time was because someone actually wrote on Wattpad a short story of the same not trope, but the idea somewhat, but it's very, very different to what I was thinking of. I thought of it in high school, but then in college, which I still am currently, having a writing buddy, mainly for productivity, but because me and my friend are actually both artistic writers, even though she does stage plays, whereas I do novels and screenplays. I just felt motivated for 2022 that's like, you know what, let me go write this book. And hopefully someday it could be something more. It also reminded me that whatever stuff that I could remember probably wasn't worth it, and I didn't need to keep all the stuff, because some of the things that I ended up scrapping just didn't make the cut because it just wasn't meant to be in that chapter or scene, or it just got moved to something else. Maybe not in the book, but it actually got used for other book ideas that I have in mind, like the one that was constantly bugging me. And it wasn't just one book, it was like 2 or 3 books that came to mind while I was writing for the challenge. What I didn't like about this challenge was his writing schedule. I usually write from 5 to 6 in the morning. He does the 8 o'clock, and for me, I felt like I was wasting time. And because I had to wait, it made me less motivated, and that was actually similar to what I was having with Magister Vader, but she started an hour earlier than he does. In regards to his writing schedule, doing the pre-work and then the post-work, it just doesn't work for me. I'd rather have done a writing in the hour of 5 in the morning or 6 than waiting for the time period, because things never go to plan. And I get less motivated to write, and I get distracted with other stuff, and it don't work. Obviously it works for him, and he has a supportive wife that is actually also a writer as well, so she understands to give space and all that. My family are not writers, so I don't get that privilege. Another thing I didn't like was his thing of no adverbs. Now, adverbs do serve a purpose, it just has to be done correctly. And my mindset at the time was that he actually used adverbs. Not that much, but he does use it, so it kind of conflicted me. Recently I read this craft book and actually explain about why adverbs are basically kind of like a taboo thing for writers, because it turns out that they're actually really good, but they're too good to where your writing becomes really sloppy. And I can actually attest to this because I was reading a book called Swished by Amanda Hawking, and she uses so much adverbs to where that usually when you get like a reading of the character, you can continue on reading the dialogue without having to know exactly what they're doing, because you can just feel by the impression and your mind can go off of thinking it's like how they do it. Whereas for her, she's very, very like to the point of the exact detail of how she wanted the character to react, and it was just too much and it overbear the story to where I had to put it into an audiobook instead. So I understood now why he's really anti-adverb, but I still enjoy adverbs here and there because you can get away with it sometimes and it's not a bad thing. Like I said, he uses adverb when 90% of it has no adverbs. Now the things I'm going to keep for my writing routine. Keeping the door closed in the mornings. Especially when my folks are doing whatever they're doing. Having that, it kind of just stalls them for a moment. Now they still call through the door and all that, so I can get away with it. But at least it's like, it kind of gives them a step back. Like think before they act type of deal. Try to build a word count or a page count. I definitely did this for my first draft to where my goal was to do like 2 or 3 days of writing 8 pages or just get like 4 pages in. Now for my second revision, I'm actually doing a word count of 3,000 words. Yeah, so I basically went over his, but that's because I'm at the point to where my writing is actually pretty strong and I know where the story is going and I can hear the characters so much better that it just flows. And I actually realized that by the time that I feel like the chapter is done, I look at the word count and find that it's like, oh wait, I wrote over 2,000 words. Having my phone flipped over and having the notifications on silent is really a good thing for me, because I noticed that I had like so much stuff for my calendar blocking that it just kept going off and off and then it distracted me. So noises actually, even like the little stings, throw me out of the story and then it's hard for me to get back into it. The things I'm ditching, pretty much everything else. His schedule interferes with my fasting schedule because I do intermittent fasting, and I like to write earlier than him. That way I feel accomplished, but at the same time, early in the morning, nobody's up. And that time period is for me to write in peace and be fully concentrated while I still can. And that's my experience of writing like Stephen King for 30 days. Now, I didn't finish my draft for the challenge, but I don't consider this a failure either because I actually learned something. And that's really valuable to me because I learned more about myself and I continue to be a stronger writer in the process. If you guys decide to do this challenge, tag me on Instagram. I'll have it on the screen. And in the meantime, take care of yourselves and I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye.